When most people picture Florida, their mind jumps to a pretty predictable highlight reel. Disney castles, South Beach nightlife, gated retirement communities with perfectly trimmed hedges, and a guard at the gate. Miles of coastline crowded with glass condo towers that all look like they came from the same catalog. But Florida has a secret side, a version of the state that developers forgot about. The tourists drive straight past, and the billionaires have not yet figured out how to buy. These are the towns where the sidewalks are uneven, the diner has only one waitress, and nobody has ever heard the phrase craft cocktail. The post office still closes for lunch, the drugstore still spins milkshakes behind a counter, and the pace of life moves at about the same speed it did when Kennedy was in the White House. Today we are taking you deep into 10 Florida towns that genuinely feel like they are stuck somewhere in the 1960s. Not as a gimmick, not because somebody built a retro diner for Instagram photos. These are real places full of real people where time just quietly decided to stop. Some of them are tiny, some are surprisingly close to major cities, and one of them is so unusual that a huge portion of its residents claim they can talk to the dead. Stick around until the end because the final town on this list is maybe the most perfectly preserved slice of old Florida left in the entire state, and almost nobody talks about it. Let us begin. Number 10. Christmas, Florida. About half an hour east of Orlando, surrounded by nothing but palmetto scrub and the distant hum of highway traffic, sits a tiny crossroads community called Christmas. Yes, really, that is the name of the town. It was named back in the 1830s when American soldiers stationed a military outpost here on December 25th during the Second Seminole War, and the name just stuck. Forever. And the town leaned into it, hard. Christmas, Florida is best known for a post office that stays decorated with a Christmas tree and ornaments all year long every single day of the calendar. People drive in from across the country to mail their holiday cards from here, just to get that postmark. Outside the post office stands a giant lighted Christmas tree that has been up since the late 1950s, quietly glowing next to the highway regardless of season. Walk around the town itself and there is almost nothing modern to see. A few bait shops, a trading post selling Seminole crafts and alligator jerky, a tiny local history museum. Chain stores have never been able to justify opening a location here because the population has stayed under 1,500 for decades. It is the kind of place where you half expect to see a Chevy Bel Air rolling through with the windows down and a transistor radio on the dashboard. Number 9. Yeehaw Junction. If there is a more perfectly named town in all of Florida, we have not found it. Yeehaw Junction sits at the crossroads of US Highway 60 and State Road 60, in a flat, empty stretch of Central Florida that most travelers only see through a windshield at 70 miles an hour. This was once a legendary rest stop for cattle ranchers, truckers, and citrus haulers moving goods between Florida's coasts back in the mid-20th century. The town's main landmark, the Desert Inn, was built as a roadside stop in the 1920s, and by the 1960s it had become a rowdy, working-class hub where ranch hands and long-haul drivers came to eat, drink, play cards, and occasionally get in fistfights. It was such a culturally important part of old Florida that it was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Today, Yeehaw Junction is fading. The Desert Inn tragically collapsed in a storm a few years back. But drive through on a sleepy afternoon and you can still feel it. The old gas stations, the hand-painted signs, the abandoned motel rooms with their doors hanging open, a weather-beaten billboard that has not been updated since the Nixon administration. It feels less like a town and more like a black and white photograph somebody forgot to take down from the wall. Number 8. Ochapee. Deep in the Everglades, on a lonely stretch of the Tamiami Trail that cuts across the very bottom of the Florida Peninsula, you will find a town so small that most people did not realize they have driven through it. Ochapee. Population, essentially nothing. But Ochapee is home to one of the most photographed buildings in all of Florida. It is the smallest operating post office in the entire United States. The building is roughly 7 feet by 8 feet. It was originally an irrigation shed for a tomato farm. When a fire destroyed the old general store back in the 1950s, the postal worker grabbed the shed, dragged it to the side of the road, and kept delivering mail out of it. And 60-something years later, it is still in operation. The swamp around Ochapee has barely been touched. You will see hand-carved signs advertising airboat rides, fish camps that look exactly like they did when Eisenhower was president, a panther crossing sign on the side of the highway because the endangered Florida panther actually lives in these woods. There is a little restaurant called Joni's Blue Crab Cafe that has been around for decades, serving gator tail and stone crab to bikers and locals on wooden picnic tables under a tin roof. No neon, no Wi-Fi password, no tourist trap gift shop selling overpriced keychains. Just a slow, sweaty, incredibly authentic corner of Florida that modern life has not touched. Number 7. White Springs. In the northern part of the state, up near the Georgia border, a bend in the Suwannee River hides a town that has genuinely been forgotten by the rest of Florida. White Springs was once, believe it or not, one of the most famous tourist destinations in the entire American South. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, people traveled from all over the country to bathe in its sulfur spring, which was said to have healing powers. Grand hotels lined the streets. A bathhouse the size of a small cathedral was built right over the spring itself. And then it just all faded. The tourists moved south. The hotels closed. Most of the big buildings were torn down or left to rot. But what remains is absolutely captivating. There is a general store that has been operating since the 1880s. There are wood frame houses that have barely been touched in a century. The original stone walls of the old bathhouse still stand next to the river, empty and quiet. And every single year since 1953, White Springs hosts the Florida Folk Festival, one of the oldest continuously running folk festivals in the United States. Locals show up with banjos, dulcimers, fiddles, and family recipes, and for one weekend, the town briefly comes back to life in a way that would have felt right at home in 1962. Walk the main street on any other day of the year, though, and the silence is almost loud. You will hear wind in the Spanish moss, the creak of a wooden porch, and not a whole lot else. Number 6. Flagler Beach. Up and down the Atlantic coast of Florida, developers have spent the last 40 years replacing every low-slung beach motel with giant, identical condo towers. Ormond, Daytona, Jacksonville Beach, Pompano, Hollywood, all of them have been flattened and rebuilt into something that basically looks the same. Except Flagler Beach. Flagler Beach is a small coastal town tucked between Daytona and St. Augustine that somehow survived. Drive down scenic highway A1A through Flagler Beach and the ocean is actually visible. There are no giant walls of concrete blocking your view. The buildings are 1 and 2 stories tall, painted in faded pastels, with screen doors that slap shut in the wind. Mom and pop motels with neon signs from the 1960s. Tiny surf shacks with wooden boards leaned up against the front wall. A wooden fishing pier that stretches out over the Atlantic just like it has for decades. There are no fancy rooftop bars, no pay-by-the-minute beach clubs. The local restaurants serve baskets of fried shrimp, grouper sandwiches, and cold beer, and they charge you what a meal should actually cost. Surfers paddle out before dawn. Retirees claim the same beach chair every morning and wave to each other like neighbors on a porch. In a state that has been almost entirely rebuilt by money and marketing, Flagler Beach stubbornly refuses to change. And if you have ever wondered what a Florida beach vacation looked like before the developers arrived, this is very close to the answer. Number 5. Gulfport. Across the bay from the glass towers of downtown St. Petersburg, there is a tiny, funky, totally unpretentious little city called Gulfport. And it feels like somebody picked up a piece of the 1960s counterculture and gently dropped it onto the Gulf Coast. Gulfport's downtown is a few blocks long. There's one main street with art galleries, independent bookstores, vintage clothing shops, and diners where you can still get breakfast for under $10. The casino, which is not a gambling casino but actually a historic waterfront dance hall, was built in the 1930s and hosts swing dance nights, drum circles, and community theater almost every week. The houses are small, colorful, one-story cottages with hand-painted mailboxes and lawns full of plastic flamingos, wind chimes, and driftwood sculptures. People sit on front porches in the evening and actually talk to each other. Artists have been quietly moving here for decades because the rent was cheap and the light off the water was beautiful, and their presence has given the whole town this relaxed, bohemian, slightly weird personality that is genuinely rare in modern Florida. No chain coffee shops, no luxury high-rises, no gated communities carved out of former mangrove swamp. Gulfport feels like the anti-Miami, and the people who live there want to keep it that way. Number 4. Cedar Key. Out on the Gulf Coast, about a 2-hour drive from almost anywhere, a narrow road stretches out across open marshland and over 4 small bridges before ending at a cluster of tiny islands. That is Cedar Key, and if you are looking for the last truly authentic old Florida fishing village, this is very likely it. Cedar Key has roughly 700 year-round residents. There is not a single traffic light in the whole town. There's not a single chain store, no McDonald's, no Starbucks, no Walgreens, not one nationally recognized logo anywhere. The locals, including a lot of the police officers, drive golf carts instead of cars. Most of the buildings downtown are made of weathered wood and sit on stilts, elevated a few feet over the salt water that surrounds everything. Back in the 1800s, Cedar Key was one of the biggest ports in all of Florida, shipping timber, pencils, and seafood across the country. A devastating hurricane in 1896 essentially wiped it off the map, and the town never fully rebuilt, which is precisely why it still looks the way it does today. Wooden docks creak under your feet, clam farmers head out at dawn in small, flat-bottomed boats, a few tiny seafood restaurants serve whatever was caught that morning, a bookstore, a historical society, an art co-op run out of a former general store. There is an intentional resistance to change here. The residents have voted down chain restaurants and big condo projects for decades. They know exactly what they have. Walking the streets of Cedar Key genuinely feels like stepping into a Florida travel postcard from 1965, and the residents are determined to keep it that way. Number 3. Mount Dora. A short drive northwest of Orlando, tucked into a surprisingly hilly corner of Central Florida that most people do not know exists, sits a town that honestly does not feel like it belongs in the state at all. Mount Dora. The town was incorporated back in 1910, and as the name suggests, it sits on a small hill overlooking a huge freshwater lake. The elevation actually makes a noticeable difference. There is a breeze off the lake, there are Victorian houses with wraparound porches, there are gas lamp-style streetlights. The entire downtown is made up of old brick storefronts from the early 1900s that have been lovingly preserved, rather than torn down. Mount Dora has gone all in on its vintage identity. Antique stores line the main streets. The Lakeside Inn, which has been continuously operating as a hotel since 1883, still rents out its original rooms to guests. There are weekly craft fairs, monthly art festivals, and a legendary annual antique boat show where people bring in wooden Chris-Craft runabouts from the 1940s and 1950s. Locals nicknamed Mount Dora the New England of Florida, and honestly, the label fits. But beyond the tourist draw, daily life here just moves at a slower, quieter rhythm. Neighbors know each other, shopkeepers remember your face, kids ride bikes around the lake without anybody worrying about it. It is a small town frozen at maybe its best and most beautiful version of itself, and it has refused to modernize even as Orlando sprawls closer and closer every year. Number 2. Cassadaga. Now we are getting into genuinely strange territory, because Cassadaga, Florida is not just a town stuck in the past, it is a town that has intentionally chosen to live in another era entirely, and it has been doing it since the 1890s. Cassadaga is a tiny, unincorporated community in Volusia County, about an hour from Orlando. It has a population of roughly 300 people, and that population is overwhelmingly made up of mediums, psychics, spiritual healers, and followers of a 19th century religion called spiritualism. In fact, the town is officially home to the Southern Cassadaga Spiritualist Camp, which was founded in 1894 and is considered the oldest continuously active spiritualist community in the southeastern United States. The town's nickname is the psychic capital of the world. Walking through Cassadaga feels like wandering onto a movie set. Small Victorian cottages line the shaded streets, each one painted a different color, with hand-painted signs out front advertising services, readings, seances, Reiki sessions, tarot, pet medium consultations. Most of the residents live on leased land owned by the camp, in houses that have been handed down through generations of spiritualists. The Cassadaga Hotel, built in 1927 and widely rumored to be haunted, sits at the center of town and rents rooms to curious visitors from all over the world. The town has no cemetery, which is a famous local detail. There is a tiny bookstore, a tiny cafe, a meditation garden, and the rest is just quiet streets, wind in the oak trees, and the slow, deliberate pace of a community that simply has not changed and does not want to. You do not have to personally believe in what the residents of Cassadaga believe, but there is no denying that it is a place unlike anywhere else in Florida, or honestly, anywhere else in the country. Number 1. Micanopy. And finally, the most perfectly preserved small town on this entire list, tucked into the rolling oak forests south of Gainesville, in north central Florida, is a village so small and so quiet that even a lot of Floridians have never heard of it. Micanopy. Population? Around 600 people. Land area? About 1 square mile. Micanopy is considered the oldest continuously inhabited inland town in Florida. American settlers arrived here in the early 1820s, and the town has basically been in slow motion ever since. The main street, Calaca Boulevard, is maybe a quarter-mile long. It is shaded by enormous ancient live oak trees dripping with Spanish moss that filtered the afternoon sun into soft green light. The storefronts are 19th and early 20th century brick and wood, and almost every single one of them is now an antique shop, a used bookstore, or a tiny family-run cafe. There are no chain stores, there is no stoplight, there is a very real chance that during your visit, a dog will walk up to you in the middle of the street and decide to be your friend for the rest of the afternoon. If the town looks familiar, There is a reason. McConaughey was the filming location for the 1991 movie Doc Hollywood starring Michael J. Fox because filmmakers were specifically looking for a town that still looked like small-town America from a much earlier era. They did not have to change a single thing. McConaughey already was that town. Locals gather on porches. Shopkeepers chat with you for 20 minutes about a single old glass bottle. The air smells like oak leaves and wood polish and fried food from the one pizzeria in town. The nearby Paynes Prairie Preserve is home to wild bison and wild horses, which is the kind of detail that just makes the whole place feel even more like a piece of Florida nobody ever wrote down in the travel brochures. If you want to step into a time machine without leaving the state, McConaughey is the closest thing Florida has to one. So there you have it. 10 towns scattered across the Sunshine State, where the rush of the modern world never quite managed to land. Some of them are holding on to the past intentionally by the stubborn willpower of their residents. Others simply got passed over by the highways, the developers, and the big money, and they quietly kept living the way they always had. And honestly, there are plenty more we could not fit into this video. Places like Matlacha, Havana, Inglis, Apalachicola, Chiefland, and Fernandina Beach all have a little bit of that same stuck-in-time magic, and maybe we will cover those in a future episode. The real question is, which one of these towns would you most want to visit? Or have you already been to one of them, and if so, how did it compare to what you were expecting? Drop a comment down below and let us know. We read every single one. If you enjoyed this video, do us a favor and hit that like button, and make sure you subscribe to Inside Florida so you do not miss the next one. We have a whole lot more stories from the hidden corners of this state coming soon. Thanks for watching. And remember, the Florida the tourists see is not the real Florida. The real Florida is out there somewhere down a quiet back road waiting for you to find it.